Hi everyone, my name is Sam. I'm from the OnCanada Project, and I'm really excited to chat with you all today. Um, Today we are going to talk about Doug Ford's most recent attack on our province, Bill 23, or the More Homes Built Faster Act, which is meant to address the housing crisis, even though Bill 23 doesn't actually address affordability or folks experiencing houselessness. What it does include is the gutting of conservation authorities. But what exactly are conservation authorities, and why does Doug Ford seem like he doesn't care about our constitutional rights, workers' rights, public education, public health care, livable wages? But for this live in particular, we're going to talk about why Doug Ford doesn't seem to care about protecting our planet. Our friends at the Narwhal, which is super exciting, Fatima, Syed, and McIntosh are here to join us and discuss what's going on. So I'm going to figure out how to. If you have any questions throughout our live, please drop them in the comments. I'm sure they'll be right. Oh my gosh, you guys look so cute in your matching toques.
Thanks for having us.
Oh my gosh, thanks for being here. I'm so excited. I'm excited to jump into this because you guys published another one this morning, right? The days are hard, but I'm pretty sure. And I was reading that and I was like, oh my God, I'm still confused about what's happening. And I think everything that's going on with QP right now, it's kind of in the background, but it's still happening. And I don't know, stress. So can we start with, for those people who didn't have time to read the article yet, like a summary on what's going on?
Take it away.
Well, listen, it's interesting you brought up QP, right? Someone this morning texted me saying, like, there's three things under provincial jurisdiction that are so important: healthcare, education, and environment. And the Doug Ford government seems to be failing on all three fronts. And somehow we have to find the capacity to pay attention to all of them, right? So on the environment front, the Doug Ford government tabled this housing legislation last week that was intended to build more homes quickly. But when you read it, and it's just dozens of pages in very jargony language, you actually realize that they're just cutting a lot of things to make it easier for developers to just do whatever they want. And that includes a lot of environmental protections, everything from, where we build, like, we don't allow, in Ontario, we don't allow construction on wetlands, for example, which Emma will explain better than I will. And that's because we are mindful of the impacts of flooding in this province. But the Doug Ford government wants to weaken those regulations. Mm-hmm. Things like, what kind of parks can we build in our city? They're broadening the criteria. So like a courtyard outside a building with like a tree or a plant on it can also be counted as a park. And it's little things like that are just adding up to a serious and very concerning, future where we might not have environmental protections being as strong as we want them to be.
I think like maybe in a big sense what it goes back to is when it comes to the housing crisis, we hear a lot from our politicians that we have to choose between the environment and having housing that we desperately, desperately need. Two non-homeowners here. But that's actually a false choice, and we can get more into that later. But I think that's the crux of what's happening.
And just for context for our community, because government jargon speech is sometimes hard, what does it mean to table something?
Sure, that's a great question. So basically the way that, laws are created is the government proposes them first, and they submit it to Queen's Park for everyone to look at, and then it's a process. The ministers look at it. There's a public consultation process. So for example, next week on November 10th, there's going to be a public hearing in Brampton where, members of the government committee that are in charge of issues of, municipal affairs and housing and so forth will hear from whoever wants to testify. You do have to sign up about their concerns and what they think should change in the bill. And once that entire review process is completed, then it goes for a final vote. And if it does get that, it becomes law. And with this bill being the way it is, some elements of it would be immediately in effect. We don't know, and it's very hard to identify which ones would go immediately into effect, but because there's so many, any of them could have devastating impacts.
And tabling is the first step in that process,
yes.
right? Yeah. So just getting it out there for everyone to get the first look and start moving through the process.
And then can we, I promise we'll get into the meat of it in a second, but Doug Ford also has a majority government right now. So if he wants this to pass, it's going to pass. And the only real, I feel like, recourse we have as is like the community responding to it and being frustrated with it, because there isn't really much that, like, there isn't like a checks and balances within the system anymore, because they're all just going to vote yay, aren't they? Like,
I mean, probably, yeah.
okay, great. Just want to make sure we're all on the same level of this sucks, you know?
The thing is that because this bill is so broad, it's all hope isn't lost, because even if the bill passes, certain elements of it are sort of open for further conversation, right? They can't do this without talking to all the stakeholders involved. And we've been speaking to so many people, everyone from conservation authorities to people in like city councils to people who design parks, and they're all trying to get the government to sit with them. So even if the legislation passes as it is, there might still be conversations happening about how it actually filters down. I think the main concern right now is understanding what impact this would have immediately and in the long term. And this isn't the first time they've tried this, right? The Doug Ford government has tried to cut environmental protections to build more houses before, and it's not exactly helped us. They tried this like 4 years ago, and we still don't have more houses. So it's that constant debate that we really need to be engaged with, which is, can we protect the environment and build houses? A lot of people say it's possible.
The other thing that I think is important about this time period right now and what citizens can do is in Ontario, we actually have this super cool piece of law called the Environmental Bill of Rights. And part of what that does is it guarantees that the government must consult the public for at least 30 days before they make any changes affecting the environment. They've broken that law before, and it, you know, whatever that happens. But it gives us all this window in which, like, if you really care about this one way or the other, now is the time to tell the government how you feel, because they don't reconsider these things often, but they have. And you never know which things they're going to be open to consideration on.
Okay, so let's jump into one of the biggest questions that we got was, what exactly are conservation authorities? And like, who's in charge of them right now?
We tried to split this up earlier because we're both such experts. Okay, so conservation authorities are unique to Ontario. This is this really cool thing that we have where, you know, 50 plus years ago, we had a Hurricane Hazel.
Uh-huh. Before. Yeah. The one hurricane in Ontario that went off.
Devastated. And we were like, never again will we let, you know, a climate event of this proportion negatively impact us. Like, never again will we let it hurt us. So we created conservation authorities.
Small correction. I'm so sorry. I was supposed to do this part and I chickened out. Conservation authorities were created 10 years earlier, but they didn't have as many powers. After the hurricane, the province was like, we got to beef these guys up and give them more power so that they can help prevent tragedies like this from happening in the future. Fun fact, right in Doug Ford's own neighborhood, an entire street was wiped out and 35 people were killed when their houses were swept away by floodwater.
Yeah.
How many years ago was this?
1954. So not that,
holy shit.
like, there are people alive today who were
Right.
Remember it.
Yeah.
And so these bodies, their entire job is to prevent flood risk and mitigate it.
Mm-hmm.
And what they did is they divided the province up by watershed. So they looked at it not geographically, not city by city, but by natural environment by natural environment. Like, how do we preserve this section of Ontario that includes this much, you know, this many forests and this many, you know, water bodies and so forth.
You can think about it like the Humber River, for example.
Yes.
We're going to look at it as the whole Humber River. All the streams that go into it, all the way until it flows into Lake Ontario.
And this is a scientific marvel. Like, no other jurisdiction in the world has done this. And because of that, they're able to take this like bird's eye view of the province and be like, okay, if there is a flood in Northern Ontario, how is it going to impact Southern Ontario? How do we like, minimize the impacts of it? Or if like one river in the Southern Ontario like rises in water levels, how is that going to impact the entire ecosystem? And they have, they monitor the development in these watersheds. They monitor sort of all the activity to make sure that everything really is preserved and protected as much as possible.
They also run conservation areas. So if you've ever gone hiking in the Greater Toronto area, chances are you were on conservation authority
Like think of Mount Nemo, Rattlesnake Point, Dundas Peak, all these places we love.
Locations.
All the they're all run by these authorities that make them look so beautiful and protect them for us.
Okay, so this amazing thing that's like so unique to Ontario, that's kind of a bit of a marvel, even globally, is like a thing that's being used to understand the impact that flooding could have on a province and in an area. Doug Ford's like, nah, we don't need that anymore.
Mostly.
Yeah.
So the government's line is that they want conservation authorities to just like refocus on their core mandate, that flood prevention thing. But in practice, what they're doing doesn't actually do what they're saying it does. The government is taking away these agencies' abilities to like weigh in on all kinds of development, right? Or to say no to development, or give it like certain conditions, like you have to avoid this swamp or something like that. And those little things, those like piecemeal decisions that they make, are how they prevent floods. So like if you take away that, I mean, they lose a lot of what they are doing right now. So that's the weird contradiction that's happening here.
Yeah, it's like saying that, they're sort of blaming conservation authorities for the lack of housing. And this is the problem, right, Sam? Like, it's not conservation authorities. All conservation authorities do is like, yeah, you can build if you adhere to this criteria and also area. Because if you build too much in this area, it's going to hurt turtles. It's going to hurt birds. It's going to hurt plant life. It's going to hurt biodiversity. It's going to cause flooding. So they've created this checklist that, the Doug Ford government says is limiting developers' ability to actually build things. That's not true. There are a whole host of reasons why we don't have more houses. Municipalities go through like this really, and I know this sounds really boring, but stick with me. It's a really arcane, long, years-long process where they identify pockets of land where development can take place. They've already identified this and they've given the green light. You're a developer, go build in this neighborhood of Mississauga, Toronto, Hamilton, so forth. The problem is they're not building there. Or
they're building in a way that isn't the right way.
Like, or they're not building fast enough.
Too spaced out, too slow. Yeah.
So it's not conservation authorities that are holding them back. It's a whole host of other problems. One could argue it's actually developers who are holding construction back.
I think also there is nuance to it, right? Like, we've heard from a lot of people in the last week who are like, I wanted to build a deck on my house and I couldn't because the conservation authority said no, and it cost me all this money and it took all this time. Like, yeah, that can be super frustrating. Unfortunately, I can't relate. Don't have a house, don't have a deck. But I get it. Like, if you want to do stuff with your own home and you can't, or it's expensive and it's harder than it needs to be, it might be that there totally are ways that conservation authorities could be run more efficiently, and some of that stuff could be faster and easier. The problem is, like, we got to remember why these things are here.
Especially in a climate emergency.
Yeah, because flooding is expected to happen more often, more intensely, and these conservation authorities are really seeing the big picture in a way that you can't, like, who knows which deck on whose property is going to be the piece of straw that breaks the donkey's back, right? And we really need them in that role. So that's the thing I want to consider. Yes, they can be frustrating, but is this the right way to deal with that?
Okay, so
I know it's a lot.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. We've been overwhelmed for a week, if that helps. Like, this.
Yeah, it's just like, it just feels like I just mentally, I think about what it has happened, what we've seen happen in BC. Like, I know it's happening globally. There's been flooding and mudslides and all these things, but like within our Canadian bubble, like we saw it happen in BC last year. I don't know, time makes no sense, but last year, and it was so devastating. I just kept thinking, my God, thank goodness this type of shit doesn't happen here. Little did I know that we had like mechanisms in place to help prevent that. And then to hear that it's being gutted, as it just makes no sense to my brain. And I'm just like, I don't even know where to go from here.
Honestly, I think, oftentimes when, Emma and I are reporting on climate policy, the thing that you hear the most is that, it's red tape. They're trying to get rid of red tape. But we really need to, expand and reframe the conversation to understand that addressing the climate emergency isn't red tape. Like, kind of need these checks and balances in place. Like, there's no point building a house on a floodplain only to have it destroyed 5 to 10 years down the line. Like, we want houses, like, all three of us want houses that will last hopefully generations, that will become family homes, if you don't have, conservation authorities, or if you don't have people really looking at how are we actually building communities? Is there good quality parkland being involved in the development process? Are we thinking about like green buildings? Like, are they going to be energy efficient? Do we have like a good waste and recycling system in every sort of community? Those are all important considerations to build communities, not just houses. Someone said to me the other day, it's like Doug Ford's bill is called More Homes Built Faster, but they're not building communities, and we need communities that will last in a climate emergency. It's a very fine distinction, but we really need to think about it that way.
And I do want to give them credit where just the little bit of credit is due. Other parts of the housing bill are aimed at like making development more dense, so that we like theoretically could have some of those like communities where things are walkable and
there's transit.
But yeah, we've seen some critiques of that stuff too. That's not our expertise as much, so just to put it out there, but there's more to this somehow. Even what we're talking
the problem is they won't talk to us, Sam. So I wish we could give you more details, but Emma and I have sent them like 50 questions since last week,
probably something close to that.
And they've answered 0. So we don't know what their thinking is. We don't know sort of what their justification is or what evidence they have. And so we'd love to believe that there's good motivations behind this. And they say to us, we're not gonna reduce any flood mitigation efforts. We want to believe that. The problem is we don't have the evidence or the reasoning or even just like time to like with the ministers involved to understand how they would protect the environment while also building all these houses.
To give you like, and stop us if we're just like fire hazard information at any point.
This is great. I'm learning so much.
So one of the things they're doing that's a great example of like the uncertainty of this situation is they've asked conservation authorities to look at all the land they hold and assess how much of that land and what of that land would be developable.
Mm-hmm.
They're asking conservation authorities to give up land for development.
Like their nice like the Instagram land that we were just talking about?
Like, I think that they would probably decide that like, hey, Mount Nemo is not suitable
for development, but they have to look at it.
But they have to look at that. And so conservation authorities, like, they're not rich. They don't just buy land because they buy parcels of land that are floodplain. They buy things that are of really big conservation value, like those amazing trails that we're talking about. They hold other land that is like important for the conservation value, but they don't necessarily open it up to the public. There are little bits of land around. But they don't just buy it for no reason. And so we asked, the couple of questions we did get were at a press conference with the ministers, and we asked, how much land do you think that this will actually open up for development? They didn't know. They have no idea. Which is an interesting exercise to go through when you don't know if it will actually result in anything. And yeah, so if it seems like the information might be confusing or vague, we know.
We're trying.
We're doing our best.
But like the issue that you guys were just noting was that there, like, it's not really a lack of land that's the issue, right? Like we have land that's been like, this is good to go, build on this, that developers are not building in a way that's fast, or like, they're not doing their part of the process. So like, what does it matter if we free up all this land if the developers are slow as shit?
Well, that's the thing. I think, we really need to look hard at what is causing the delays. And I don't think it's any one thing. It's a whole host of things. And the problem, the scary problem, to be quite honest, is the fact that the government is just pointing at one thing to blame. They're
Mm-hmm.
pointing
Well,
at environmental protections. And that's concerning because if you take them away one by one, someone in the story that we published today, which is like a full detailed list of all the protections that they're trying to cut in this bill. Someone described it as kind of like a death by 1,000 cuts because that's what they're doing.
oh,
Strip something here, cut something there, weaken this,
that's
and the criteria here, and what happens in 10 years, 20 years when the climate emergency keeps delivering severe impacts. We're already seeing like more flooding in Ontario, more forest fires in Ontario. What happens when we don't have those sort of barriers in place? Those people who are like, no, we need to protect this wetland. We even need to strengthen it because it acts like a sponge for severe flooding or severe snowfall. Like what happens if we build on top of that? We don't have a protection anymore. Sorry, that got real dark, but I'm sorry. I've been
just
living
once I'd like to have you on
day
where
in
we
my
talk about happy things.
dark right
Okay, so let's talk. You said that we're in like did you say like a 30-day consultation type situation where people get to like voice their feelings or their thoughts because of the Environmental Bill of Rights? Am I making this up? Okay.
now.
So what are the types of things that people should be asking or saying or bringing up if they are just like, hey man, this doesn't seem too great. I don't really like this. I want less of this. How do they say that and not sound the way I just did?
Yeah.
Well, I think that like first of all, read all the stories and like try to, I mean, within reason, do your best to try to understand it. The Narwhal has an infographic that we're going to post today if it's not
On
already.
Instagram, yeah.
On Instagram. So you can learn more that way. It'll be fast. And then like, I think just writing to your MPP is like a great way to
Get involved.
to voice your opinion, no matter how strong or in which direction it goes. The other thing that you can do is go to ero.ontario.ca. That's ero.ontario.ca. That's the environmental registry. And so you can find there all of these proposals listed and an email for you to contact.
Yeah.
And not enough people really do this stuff because it's hard. We're so overwhelmed. Like we work a ton. We have to like maintain so much of our lives.
Yeah.
It's really hard to stay up to date with that stuff. But
the government needs to know how everyone feels, right? Like, do we value the environment? Do we value sort of, the kind of houses and the kind of communities that we want? Not just like tomorrow, but in 5 years, in 10 years, in 15 years, in 20 years. And one of the things we try to do at the Narwhal is to provide all this deep coverage because these things are so complicated.
For sure.
So we have to try and really understand them to just comprehend the sheer extent of what is being done. And what this government has done time and time again is publish massive, like legislations are huge. There's so many and they're jargony and they sort of, bury them with like lots of other legislation because right now like QP is happening, environment's happening, housing is happening. So we really have to try and pay attention and tell our elected officials, what do we value? What do we want? What do we want our future in Ontario to look like? Do we want environmental protections? And if the answer is yes, we should probably tell them.
And like to put it another way too, like if we all collectively take a look at this and we're like, you know what, conservation authorities do have too much power actually. Let's move ahead with this. We have to do that making an informed decision.
Yes.
We need to have people actually reading up on it, actually knowing what they're getting themselves into. Like, who knows, maybe that is the right direction. but it has to be done
Mhm.
in a way that people are okay with, I think, for it to actually work. So
But
yeah.
yeah, if you're going on a fall hike this weekend, or you know, you go visit like Northern Ontario, or you walk along a river, like just remember, like all the land in Ontario right now, they're trying to build it. They really are.
Especially everything south of Lake Simcoe, I think.
So it's all under threat of construction, and the question is, what parts of land do we want to be constructed, and what parts of land do we not want to be constructed on? And that's really important. You know, I think oftentimes we take our environment for granted because it's just all around us, and it doesn't really have a voice. And you know, time and time again, people in this space say that, you know, it's the people who have to be the voice for these lands, and figure out what to protect. And let's not forget, the lands also belong to Indigenous communities who are also saying that they weren't consulted by the Ford government when they decided to cut all of this. So I'm so sorry, Sam. It's a lot is going on. I think just be informed, talk about it with your friends, you know, engage with it, and tell the government, tell the MPPs what you think.
Okay, so we are going to post more about this. We're going to amplify the stuff that you guys have put out there. I'm going to scream into a pillow to make myself feel a little better. But so we're going to tell people to keep reading stuff on the Narwhal for sure. It's one of our favorite publications. Like, you guys do such a great job all the time, and we're big time fans of Fatima over here. Like, we're obsessed with you. I'm sure I'll be obsessed with you too, Emma, but I've just been following her. Like, yeah, you know, thank you. But what are other organizations in Ontario that people could be paying attention to that maybe like every day are organizing around these type of things? You gave us a really great website, but is there anything else that we should be sending people to that are doing the thing and would be like sort of informed about what's happening?
Well, it's hard because a lot of the environmental like activism in Ontario happens really locally. So there's like a million different groups, but the bright side is that wherever you are, if you look up like local climate action groups, there probably are a bunch in your city or your town.
Yeah.
What about you, Fatima?
I mean, conservation authorities are on Instagram and all, like they have like really great websites full of information. So like if you live, whichever region you live in, you can learn more by going on their website. So for example, if you live in Oakville, go to Conservation Halton. If you live in Mississauga, like I do, go to Credit Valley Conservation. If you live in your and what they honestly bring climate. Ontario Bureau of the Narwhal has been around. We've been looking at environmental solutions, you know, bring both good and bad stories. There are other publications that do that sometimes. Subscribe, support them, and yeah, just there are local groups everywhere doing really, really good things. If you care about turtles, there's turtle groups. If you care about trees, there's tree groups. Like, just tell us what you're looking for, and we'll point you in the direction.
Amazing. We'll circle back with the loads of our favorite animals that we want to protect, regions as well. Any closing thoughts as we wrap up? I feel honestly so much more informed, a lot angrier, I will say, but in a way that's like, at least there's like context around the anger rather than my general like, damn it, Ford energy. Yeah, what are some closing thoughts as we wrap up? And unless there's any questions, but I haven't really seen any come through. But yeah.
Well, I think I would say, like, I mean, I know we've been talking for half an hour, a wonderful half hour, but there are actually a lot of like little, very important things that the bill changes, or that like this whole package will change, that we didn't have time to explain right now. So read up on that, because I promise there's much more to be interested in here. And the other thing is to just remember that like we definitely are in a housing crisis. That is not a question. But we also don't have to, that doesn't compel us to do things that are bad for the environment or that aren't smart. Just because we need to solve this quickly doesn't mean that we should cut corners or or do things that we will regret 10 years down the line. Like there's a balance there between fast and right, you know?
Yeah.
100%.
And yeah, and the only thing I would add is I think the climate emergency can be very overwhelming, but there's a lot of people doing really, really cool things, you know?